Very good. And with that, we're going to move to the biennial zero emission vehicle report. And this is with Jessica Reichers.
Chair Solomon, Vice Chair Finley, members of the committee, thank you so much for your time today. For the record, my name is Jessica Reichers. I am the Technology and Policy Manager at the Oregon Department of Energy. I'm here to provide an overview of our 2023 Biennial Zero Emission Vehicle Report. The BIZEV, as we like to call it, and I swear you're only going to have 2 acronyms in this whole presentation, promise, provides an assessment on the state of electric vehicle adoption in Oregon. You may know the 2019 legislature directed ODO to produce the BIZEV, and in the bill, they asked us to focus on commercially available or near commercially available vehicles, and also use existing research and studies to inform the report. There are 11 specific reporting requirements that help ODO assess not only our progress on zero emission vehicle adoption, but also how this affects progress on meeting our state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. We combine 2 of the requirements together, so when you look at the report, you'll see 10 chapters that cover each of the requirements. So throughout the report, we're going to use the term electric vehicle, or EV, that was your second acronym, and rather than zero emission vehicle. And that's just because more people are familiar with the words electric vehicle instead of zero emission vehicle, but they're essentially the same thing. So as of the end of April of 2023, there were 67,738 registered passenger electric vehicles in Oregon. The state did achieve the 50,000 electric vehicle goal we see that's up there, but not until about July of 2022. And this was largely due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. It just reduced vehicle sales across the board. ODO also assessed our likelihood of meeting the next goal in 2025, which is 250,000 EVs, and we don't think it's likely that the state's going to hit that. But I have good news. We did look at 2030 and 2035, and it looks like the state is not only on track, but also will exceed meeting those goals. So that's the good side. Medium and heavy duty adoption lags light duty, and this is largely because it just costs more to buy a medium or heavy duty electric vehicle, and there's also costs involved with adding charging infrastructure that not everyone has to deal with when you buy a nice passenger vehicle. As you can see in the line chart on the left, the number of vehicles, medium heavy duty electric vehicles in Oregon is still pretty small, and most are currently delivery vans and transit buses with some mixtures of other things. But in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more electric school buses being adopted by school districts. And this is largely because there's state, federal, and utility funding that helps address the incremental costs between buying another diesel bus versus buying an electric bus. So I love this slide because it shows all of the state agencies that do programs or implement policies that help support electric vehicle adoption across the state. And while I won't dive into the specifics, this is available for you to review in your slide deck and also in the report. So this slide is the Oregon Department of Transportation's EV forecast, and it shows that the state will exceed, the 25% EV registration goal that was part of our 2030 objective. This is shown as the green line in the figure. I also want to note the yellow line was ODOT's forecast from 2022, and it jumped considerably since that forecast. This is largely due to the approval of DEQ's new Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule, which requires the delivery of electric vehicles into the state for sale. So we have those vehicles available for people to buy. Gasoline and diesel and their respective blend fuels comprise nearly 90% of fuel use in the state, and electricity or transportation fuels use in the state. And while electricity is growing, it's still slightly less than 1% of our total fuel consumption. So this is the transportation sector-wide carbon intensity from, it is not, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong notes. The next chapter in the BISEV looks at the carbon intensity of Oregon's transportation sector. So I want to be clear, this is not like what Oregon DEQ's Clean Fuels program does, where they look at the carbon intensity of the fuels themselves. We're looking at a consumption-weighted carbon intensity for the total volume of fuels that are consumed in transportation. Gasoline, diesel, and vehicle and their respective fuel blends comprise 90% of our fuel use, and electricity is less than 1% right now. So this is the transportation sector-wide carbon intensity from 2005 through to today, which has largely been decreasing. The weirdness that you see in the last few years, weirdness is a technical term, that's attributed to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw our transportation fuel consumption just altered dramatically. People drove their personal vehicles less, so we had less gasoline consumption, and we saw a rapid rise in diesel consumption, likely, although we're not certain, due to the need for more deliveries of goods to people's homes during the pandemic timeframe. While the increase of the carbon intensity for our on-road vehicles is currently on an upswing, we do anticipate, with the availability of lower carbon fuels like electricity, that the carbon intensity going forward will likely start to drop. So before I talk about the greenhouse gas portion of our report, I wanted to show you this slide because this is a question that we get quite a bit at the Oregon Department of Energy. It asks about whether building an EV comes with more greenhouse gas emissions than building a gasoline car. This is a bar chart that was developed by the US EPA, and it shows greenhouse gas emissions associated with building an EV on the right and with building a similar gasoline vehicle on the left. And while there are more greenhouse gas emissions associated with building an EV, which are shown as the red and green parts of the bar charts, over the lifetime of the vehicle, there are more emissions from the combustion of gasoline to power the vehicle, which is shown in blue. I should not make these pages so hard to get apart. There we go. So, I feel like the first panel went into this in great detail, so I'm only going to skim. We didn't achieve our 2020 greenhouse gas goal, but with the new policies that they discussed going forward, it looks like we're on much better track. And this is important because transportation emissions are 35% of all of our sector-based greenhouse gas emissions, at least in 2021. And these state policies, like that Advanced Clean Cars 2 program and Advanced Clean Trucks rules, the Climate Protection Program, and the Clean Fuels Program, play a very large role in addressing transportation emissions. So with all these programs and policies in place, we are on track to meet our 2035 goal, and that previous panel described this well, so I'm going to move on. So our next chapter covered Oregonians' awareness of EVs and their benefits. We know that exposure to EVs and general awareness of their benefits is a really good indicator that a person is going to choose an EV for their next purchase. The data shown here is from a 2022 Consumer Report survey, and it shows that only about 17% of Americans had ridden in an EV in the last year, and that 36% of respondents indicated they would definitely or seriously consider buying an EV. And in comparison, we also looked at a 2021 Portland General Electric consumer survey, and they found that nearly a quarter of their respondents had driven in an EV, and 32% intended to purchase an electric vehicle. So it seems that awareness is likely more prevalent in Oregon. So the next chapter of the report really dove into EV ownership demographics. And while I won't cover most of this chapter today, I do want to point out Table 1 on this slide that shows higher growth rates in EV ownership in areas with at least some multi-unit homes compared to areas that are exclusively single-family homes. This is interesting, and I'm not sure if it really is a trend or not, because we don't actually know if these vehicles are going to multi-unit homes. But it's interesting because being in a multi-unit home can be a barrier to buying an electric vehicle, just because it's often harder to find chargers for them. We also looked at model availability in general. There are more than 70 models available of passenger electric vehicles in Oregon today, and dozens of models are anticipated in the next decade. The table on the right shows EV production commitments from the major auto manufacturers, and several have indicated that they will only produce electric platforms by a certain date. And I hate to say it, but this is already outdated because Nissan recently announced that they're going to only make electric vehicles by 2030 or 2035. I can't remember which one, sorry. Medium and heavy duty vehicle model availability is growing as well. Note the figure on the right here, which shows a California study's anticipated commercial availability of medium and heavy duty EV models over time. At the top is wave one, which we see the earliest anticipated vehicles were transit buses. And in fact, in Oregon, those were some of the first medium and heavy duty EVs we saw on the roads. Oregon is well into wave two vehicles like cargo vans, and we're even beginning to see adoption of wave three and wave four vehicles. So we're getting there with model availability. The report also looked at upfront costs for passenger EVs, which can be lower than a comparable gasoline vehicle when buyers can take advantage of available incentives. The Inflation Reduction Act made federal EV tax credits available for many of Oregon's most popular new and used EV models. You may recall that the funds for that had run out for Tesla. Tesla are two of the top models that are purchased in Oregon. Same for the Nissan Leaf, that had run out as well. Those now can take advantage of the tax credits. Oregon's EV rebate program also offers incentives for new and used vehicles. I forgot to mention the federal tax credits also can be used for new or used. And with some incentives, they're specifically designed for low and moderate income Oregonians, which is great. However, you may know the program proved so popular that funds have been depleted for 2023, and therefore the program was suspended on May 1st. When combined with federal and state incentives, the funds that people could get could provide as much as $15,000 toward the cost of a new EV or as much as $9,000 toward a used EV. So having both of those available really makes a difference. So unlike light-duty vehicles, medium and heavy-duty EVs tend to be 2 to 3 times more expensive than a similar diesel vehicle. In addition to the cost of the vehicle, there are also costs to add the charging infrastructure to the fleet facility. Charger installation costs can be very high and are extremely variable depending on the electrical capacity needs at that facility. The next chapter focuses on charger availability and reliability. In a 2021 study, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory found that only about 1/3 of all existing light-duty vehicles are regularly parked near to an electric outlet. That means that public charging infrastructure is necessary for widespread EV adoption to occur. Oregon's charging infrastructure is growing faster than the national average, but gaps remain, especially in eastern and southern parts of the state, as you can see up on the map, and in many low-income parts of metropolitan areas. While currently 80% of charging occurs at home, other options are needed to ensure that charging is convenient, safe, and affordable for all Oregonians. The figure on the left shows a paradigm of charging options, including home and workplace charging, publicly available level 1 and 2 charging, and publicly available DC fast charging. As you move up the pyramid, the cost to install the charger rises. And in general, the time commitment for the driver also increases, although this is not always the case. Level 1 and 2 chargers generally cost about $1,600 to $7,400 per charger, including the cost of the charger and installation. The cost to purchase and install a DC fast charger are much more expensive, from around $67,000 to $250,000 per charger. As you can see from this slide, there are many funding opportunities to support EV charging infrastructure across a variety of user needs. The Federal Inflation Reduction Act had tax credits that are available for businesses in disadvantaged communities, as well as for individuals to install charging. And at the state level, the largest charging investment is being led by the Oregon Department of Transportation, who's providing $100 million toward EV charging infrastructure in the state. So consumer confidence in dependability of EVs depends on widely available, affordable, and reliable public EV charging infrastructure. But studies and surveys are indicating that consumer confidence in EV charging is declining. Charger reliability is commonly used to describe whether the equipment works, how often it breaks down, how long it's out of service, and how this is communicated to drivers. Many EV charging providers consider operational data proprietary, so ODO could not provide data on charger functionality in Oregon for this report. Further, there is no official federal or state of Oregon definition for reliability, nor are there regulations requiring charging providers to meet certain reliability standards. Prioritizing state efforts to support charger reliability is crucial to ensuring EVs are increasingly the vehicle of choice for Oregonians. Perhaps the most frequent question ODO hears about EVs is how they will affect the electric grid. And there is a BIZEV chapter that specifically addresses this. First, just to provide a sense of scale about EV load growth, the chart you see here is from Portland General Electric's Integrated Resource and Transportation Electrification Plans and shows forecasted EV loads compared to base load growth and total annual energy needs. While this does not specifically address resource adequacy issues, which I'll talk about in a minute, those occur at peak load needs, it does show the proportion of EV load in relation to overall system load. To assess resource adequacy, ODO looked at a Pacific Northwest National Laboratory study that assessed 3 different EV adoption scenarios, and they found that even under a high penetration scenario where more than 9.3 million EVs would be charging on the Western grid in 2028, there were no resource adequacy issues expected under normal operating conditions. Further, they found that if utilities implement load management strategies to shift EV loads during peak demand times, and this could be something as simple as time of use plans, the number of electric vehicles on the Western electric grid could be more than doubled to 19.6 million without triggering resource adequacy concerns. In short, Oregon electric utilities and the broader Western grid have many tools to address growing EV loads and are not expecting resource adequacy issues from EVs over the next 5 years and likely the next decade. Where utilities are anticipating some grid effect is at the local distribution system level. As you can see in this table, a residential level 2 EV charger is typically about the same energy load as an electric furnace. Local transformers that supply power to the house may be able to accommodate 1 to a few EVs charging, but at some point, the transformers may need to be upgraded to a higher capacity to serve multiple vehicles. This trigger to upgrade the local transformers could be accelerated by other household electrification measures, such as replacing gas furnaces with electric heat pumps. The last chapter of the report focuses on effects to the Oregon State Highway Fund resulting from EV adoption. ODO consults with ODOT in the development of this chapter, which largely reflects information provided in their state transportation revenue forecast. ODOT's revenue forecast finds that in the absence of other policies, state highway fund revenues are projected to slow or flatten in the coming years. ODOT is addressing this through pilot programs like the Origo Road Usage Charge Program and is working to ensure a sustainable model for future funding of Oregon State Highway Fund. And with that, thank you for your time to listen about this report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes.
It was really good, really interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
With relation to the load issues and capacity issues towards the end there, which your remarks were more encouraging than I thought on that point. Do you know about battery development and whether further innovation in batteries might reduce collective demand during charging?
Chair Solomon, Senator Golden, excellent question. And all I can tell you is there is a ton of funding happening through the U.S. Department of Energy toward advancing batteries. There are different chemistries that they look at. They're trying to improve the energy density of batteries. So while I can't give you like a specific study to point to, I can say that the overall drive is to make batteries more efficient and take less energy to be able to maintain. So I would assume that if technology progresses along those lines, that you would get that more energy efficient batteries.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. And I would say too, this is another area where innovation is going to help us, right? And when there are other cities that are facing the charging infrastructure, concerns, and I think it's like Seattle that I read about that are taking and making chargers. directly putting them into the light poles. And so that it's eliminating having to do all of this. But so it is interesting that, yes, we do. And then we came from an area where a lot of people are riding bikes and electric cars and such, and we didn't see a lot of electric chargers. It was like every time I'd see one, I'd take a picture of it and say, there it is. So, but there was a heck of a lot of people more on bikes. But anyway, thank you so much for this presentation. And yeah, any further questions, we'll follow up.
Chair Solomon, I just want to add, Portland General Electric is doing the light pole. They're doing a pilot project with that, so.
Oh, fun.
Right?
That's awesome.
Yes. So,
Excellent.
absolutely.
I'm going to find out about that.
Well, thank you for your
Hey,
time.
thank you so much. And also EVs are super low maintenance, so that's the other thing, when people find out.
I know.
That
Bikes.
people say, oh, it's a car that is only for those that have the affordability, can afford it. But my first car was a Nissan Leaf, and the only thing I did to it in 3 years was replace 2 tires and some windshield wipers.
Absolutely.
So,
Chair Solomon, if anybody wants to nerd out with me on EV stuff, you know where to find me.
oh my gosh, I am your girl.
And
Okay.
if anybody wants to ride an EV vehicle, I think,
Woo!
is it 3 out of the 5 of us have
Yeah.
one, or is it 4?
Fabulous.
At least,
It's
yeah, we're
at
very
least 3 of
electric.
us,
Very
yeah.
electric
I'm
community.
not going to tell you which 3.
It's electric.
I'm not even going to try and guess.
I love my V8.
Oh my gosh, this is
We
amazing.
will get him into
Yeah, you
electric.
can come for a ride in my
Okay.
car. It's
Thank you.
really
All right.
cool.
Riding my V8.
Thank you.
Oh, I've
can
been
listen
in
to
a
him, he can't
V8. It's okay.
And on
Big
that
deal.
note, we are going to go on to the Evolve